in a way that I can make sure everybody has access to it. But basically, Sam and Mitch invited me to come speak today just to provide a little bit of an update on the new dyslexia legislation that was passed in Oregon in July of 2015, and to talk specifically about how it affects the LCTC programs. So that's what I'm going to do today. And I actually have 3 objectives. I can get my slide to forward. There we go. So my first objective is to provide you a really brief summary of what the requirements of the new dyslexia legislation include for districts. Second objective is to share some information on how the department is addressing the teacher training requirements that are outlined in the legislation. And then finally, discuss how the teacher training requirements affect LTCT programs. So I encourage you to interrupt me at any time with questions. I'll try to keep my eye on the chat box for questions that are sent that way as well. Okay, so as far as a really brief summary of what the requirements of the dyslexia legislation include, so Senate Bill 612 is the dyslexia legislation, and as I said, it was passed in July 2015 in the regular session. And there were 3 kind of major requirements to the law. First was that the department needed to designate a dyslexia specialist who would really be there to support districts in implementing these requirements. And so that is the position that I fill at the department. I've been at ODE for a year now. I started last January in this position and really excited to be here. The second main requirement of the bill has to do with training teachers. And what Senate Bill 612 says is that the department needs to annually develop a list of training opportunities that are related to dyslexia. And the bill goes on to further specify those training requirements. So it states that each school district needs to ensure that at least one K-5 teacher in each K-5 building has received that training related to dyslexia. And importantly, if there are school districts that don't comply with that training requirement and don't secure a waiver from the department, that they be considered non-standard. However, the board needs to adopt by rule what would be the criteria for which a district could actually apply for a waiver from the teacher training requirements. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of those different scenarios that we described in rule where it would be appropriate for a district to apply for a waiver from those teacher training requirements. The other important thing to note is that the teacher training requirements become operative on January 1st of 2018. So that means we need to make sure that the one K-5 teacher in each K-5 building has completed that required training by next January 1st, so in just under a year from now. So that's the second main requirement of the bill. A few more related issues to the teacher training. The bill is very specific in terms of what that teacher training needs to look like. So first, the bill says that the department needs to work with TSPC to make sure that any training opportunity would also satisfy professional development requirements for teachers. We have to make sure that at least one of the training opportunities is offered completely online, and that really looks to those more remote districts and basically their need to access training in a way that's feasible for them. The bill states that the training opportunities need to comply with the knowledge and practice standards of an international organization on dyslexia. And basically there are 2 international organizations on dyslexia. One of the 2 has published standards, and the title is Knowledge and Practice Standards for Teachers of Reading. And I just want to stress here that these standards are not specific to dyslexia specialists or dyslexia interventionists. They're really standards for teachers of reading, and they're based on what the science tells us in terms of how we should be teaching reading. Moving on, the Senate bill also requires that the training opportunities enable the teacher to understand and recognize dyslexia, and then finally that the training opportunities will enable the teacher to implement instruction that is systematic, explicit, and evidence-based to meet the educational needs of students with dyslexia. And those three words are really important, and they were, I think, selected quite purposefully: systematic, explicit, and evidence-based. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a minute. So let's talk about the third main requirement of the bill. So the first was the department to hire a specialist. Second was to make sure the department releases annually a list of training opportunities and that one teacher in each K-5 building completes the training. And then the third requirement of the bill basically says that the department needs to develop a plan. And in that plan, we need to ensure that every K-1 student enrolled in public schools receives a screening for risk factors of dyslexia, and that in that plan, the department would provide guidance for districts in terms of how to notify parents of those children who do demonstrate risk based on that initial screening. The bill goes on to further specify the plan. So I can hear
folks, Carrie,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can folks, can you please mute your phones? Thank you.
The Senate bill is
sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
Okay. The Senate bill said that the plan needed to be developed collaboratively with experts on dyslexia, including folks representing nonprofits. But in that plan, the department needed to identify screening tests that are cost-effective, and that was a very deliberate requirement because there is not funding associated with the screening that is described in the bill. So we needed to make sure that whatever screeners districts were being asked to use, that they would be cost-effective. And that the screening had to screen for 4 specific areas: phonological awareness, rapid naming skills, letter-sound correspondence, and then a family history of difficulty in learning to read. And the plan itself was due to the interim committees on education in the legislature on September 15th of this past year. And so it was submitted and is currently posted on the ODE website on the dyslexia page. And essentially, I've been out pretty much nonstop since September, sharing information about the bill and about the plan for universal screening with districts, and really collecting a lot of feedback. And so based on that feedback, we're still continuing to modify the recommendations in the plan, and will be sharing a final plan with districts in the upcoming months, along with a specific timeline in terms of when the screening needs to be implemented. So real quick reality check for folks. I'm not sure to what extent people on the line have experience working with students with dyslexia or an understanding of what dyslexia is, but I just wanted to share the definition of dyslexia that we've included in our draft OARs that were presented to the State Board of Education at their December meeting. And this is the definition of dyslexia that has actually been adopted by the International Dyslexia Association and also adopted by the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development. And basically what the definition says is that dyslexia is considered to be a specific learning disability, and I think most of you know that dyslexia is actually included in IDEA's definition of specific learning disability as a type of specific learning disability. It's neurobiological in origin, meaning that it is something that's passed on from family member to family member, It's very organic in nature, and the brains of children with dyslexia are essentially anatomically and functionally different from the brains of children who are typically developing readers. Most people know that dyslexia is characterized essentially with difficulties with word reading, and not only accurate decoding but also fluent word reading, and you often see related difficulties with spelling. What people often don't understand is that these difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. If you speak with most people, they will tell you that dyslexia is due to a problem with vision, and that kids see the print differently, and that they reverse letters and so forth, and that is not accurate. Dyslexia is really a difficulty with language. And when we talk about a deficit with the phonological component of language, what we're really talking about is this difficulty for children with dyslexia to process spoken language, to take a word, for example, and be able to hear the individual sounds in it. So if someone told them, listen to the word splat, tell me the sounds that you hear in splat, they wouldn't be able to easily tell you the sounds in splat are splat. And they wouldn't be able to manipulate those sounds if I asked them to say, I want you to tell me the sounds in splat, or tell me what word we would have if we take the word splat and we take out the sound p, and they wouldn't be able to tell us that that leaves us with the word slat. They wouldn't be able to necessarily hold the word splat accurately in memory and retrieve it later from memory. And they really have a difficult time basically mapping those oral sounds to print, so to know that we make the sound p with the letter P. So that is really where the difficulties stem from, and those difficulties are really quite unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and in spite of the provision of effective classroom instruction. And what happens over time for children with dyslexia is because reading is such a struggle, they are often not reading widely or independently like their peers, and they're not developing new vocabulary as a result, nor are they developing additional background knowledge as a result of that wide reading. And so their reading comprehension will suffer over time as well. Two other points I'll make, and then we'll move on and talk about that teacher training piece of the law. The population of individuals with dyslexia is really heterogeneous. Each child is unique, and the severity of the dyslexia will vary from child to child. Really thinking about those children being on a continuum from experiencing dyslexia mildly to experiencing dyslexia quite severely. And I think the most important point to remember is that the environment will determine how severely a child will experience dyslexia, and that the instruction that we provide is the most important environmental factor. So let's quickly move on and just talk about the work the department has done in the area of the teacher training requirement. We know that the bill requires the department to develop a list of dyslexia-related training opportunities. And so one of the pieces of information that I often share with districts about what should instruction and intervention for students with dyslexia look like is a fact sheet that has been published by the International Dyslexia Association and is called Effective Reading Instruction for Students with Dyslexia. Just wanted to quickly share this. Basically, this is like a 2 to 3 page fact sheet that is really easy to digest for school personnel and parents as well. And essentially in the fact sheet, they identify, okay, what would the components of effective intervention look like for children with dyslexia? And so the components are outlined here. And I won't go through them specifically, but you can see, for example, that you want to make sure that the instruction includes the study of the sound structure of spoken words, and that we include sound symbol association in our instruction. But then not only does the fact sheet identify, okay, what are the components of effective instruction or intervention, but what would be the principles that we would use to teach those components. And so they identify the need for systematic and cumulative instruction, so really making sure that the design is well organized and begins with easier tasks and builds on those to more complex tasks. They also stress the importance that the instruction is explicit. So I'm hoping these words sound familiar to you because these are the same words that are in Senate Bill 612, systematic instruction, explicit instruction. But then the fact sheet also points out the need for very diagnostic diagnostic teaching, and this is especially the case when children don't immediately respond to the intervention that we provide, that we really need to start to intensify and individualize that instruction. And we can do that by really basically providing continuous assessment on a day-to-day basis to see where are the children making errors in their lessons, where do they need more practice to attain fluency or mastery. So those are the principles that we want to use when teaching the components. One other point I'll make about instruction, and this is a point that comes from Sally Shaywitz, who directs a center on dyslexia at Yale and is probably the most well-known researcher in the area of dyslexia. And what she says is that teaching a dyslexic child to read is based on the very same principles used to teach any child to read, but since the neural systems responsible for transforming print into language may not be as responsive as in other children, the instruction has to be relentless and amplified in every way possible so that it penetrates and takes hold. And this is really an important takeaway point about the instruction that we provide for children with dyslexia. It is not significantly different from the good instruction that we would provide any child in terms of teaching them to read, but we need to make sure that we are even more especially relentless and amplified in that instruction if it's going to penetrate and take hold. So as far as how the department is moving forward in putting together the list of dyslexia-related training opportunities, that list of training opportunities will be program neutral. And what I mean by that is you won't see trainings that train teachers on a particular curriculum, like, let's say, the Wilson system, or Read Naturally, or something like that. It'll be program neutral training. And specifically, the content will focus on making sure the participant understands and recognizes dyslexia. There will also be a really large emphasis